A reading from the book of Daniel, chapter 7. In the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head as he lay in bed. Then he wrote down the dream. I, Daniel, saw in my vision by night the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. And four beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I watched, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a human being, and a human mind was given to it. Another beast appeared, a second one that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side, had 3 tusks in its mouth among its teeth, and was told, "Arise, devour many bodies." After this I watched. Another appeared like a leopard. The beast had 4 wings of a bird on its back and 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the visions by night a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great teeth like iron and was devouring, breaking in pieces and stamping what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that preceded it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns when another horn appeared, a little one coming up among them to make room for it. 3 of the earlier horns were plucked up by the roots, and there were eyes like human eyes in this horn, and a mouth speaking arrogantly. And as I watched, thrones were set in place, and an ancient one took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels like burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence, and 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. And I watched then because of the noise of the arrogant words that the horn was speaking. And as I watched, the beast was put to death, and its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. And as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being, coming with the clouds of heaven. And as he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him, to him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, in my spirit was troubled within me, and I approached one of the attendants to ask him the truth concerning this. So he said that he would disclose to me the interpretation of this matter. As for these 4 great beasts, 4 kings shall arise out of the earth, but the holy ones of the Most High shall receive the kingdom, and possess the kingdom forever, forever and ever. Amen. The word of the Lord. It's good to see you all, and to be seen, even through a screen, for those of you downtown. It's good to be here at the Bryans, even if I can't see them either with kids being sick. The drive up here is beautiful enough, especially now. Like many of you, this is my favorite time of year in Chattanooga. But not just the fall. I love it for all the typical reasons, but especially because of Halloween and because it's horror movie season. I grew up not being able to watch horror movies, and for good reason, I get it. But it's not one of those it's one of those parental things that backfired for me. The more forbidden, the more enticing. And by the time I was in high school, my brother and I were hooked. But also, I think, for good reason. It's not all a bloodlust of mindless cheap thrills. As a vast genre with multiple subgenres that explore the nature of fear, it turns out that much of it can be really insightful. For better and worse, there's something about fear that makes us feel alive. It wakes us up to our vulnerability, the risks of being human. Now, as a brief public service announcement, if any of you are interested in watching the Netflix show Midnight Mass, hit me up after the service. I'd love to get a discussion group together. It's excellent. And much of what is true about horror movies or television is also true of apocalyptic texts, like the one we're reading today in the book of Daniel. It's a distinct genre with its own thematic and stylistic conventions, and, as in the book of Daniel or Revelation, it can be a bit frightening. It's no surprise that we tend to avoid them, not least because they have been easily abused in frightening ways, as some of you may well have experienced. But as a genre, apocalyptic literature works to pull back the curtain and reveal a reality beyond and behind our world, as if from the vantage of heaven, usually in the form of a dream or a vision. Day-to-day struggles turn out to be part of a cosmic battle played across space and time. It's literature oriented to the future that reveals the present. And what is also true of apocalyptic literature is that it's literature of the oppressed. Literature that emerges from oppressed peoples keenly aware of forces beyond their control. It's often frightening in its imagery because life for oppressed peoples often is. And yet, it's literature that unmasks the agents of terror to reveal truer dynamics at work. And in our chapter here, and one of the earliest examples of this kind of writing, this kind of literature. Up to this point in the book of Daniel, we've encountered a series of court dramas, stories of Daniel and his friends who bear witness to God's power and faithfulness as a revealer of mysteries among fierce but frightened kings. But now the book of Daniel shifts, and it is Daniel who has the dream vision. In the first year of King Belshazzar, before that fateful vision with the writing on the wall, Daniel drifts to sleep, and in the darkness of night he begins to see terrifying beasts emerge from the sea. The first is like a lion with eagle's wings, the second beast like a bear with tusks, a third like a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, and then a fourth, even more frightening and bizarre, with 10 horns and one covered with little eyes and a mouth speaking arrogantly. I tried to find a children's coloring book for the kids with different monsters, but for some strange reason none seems to exist. Somebody needs to get on that. There should at least be Halloween costumes. See, here in Daniel's dream, he sees monstrous creatures permitted for a time to feast and devour. As the angelic attendant reveals, each beast signifies a king and his kingdom. Imperial forces draining the life out of the people of Israel through conquest, occupation, cultural assimilation, and finally persecution. Forces under which many, if not most, felt utterly powerless. And through Daniel's apocalyptic visions, the implicit and mundane terror stalking about their daily lives was rendered explicit. See, after the Babylonian captivity, the people of Israel had hoped to reestablish a sovereign kingdom once again in their ancestral home with some semblance of peace and security and autonomy. And instead, they encountered one regime change after the next. The Babylonians, who had taken them into captivity, would succumb to the Medians, who would fall to the Persians, who would in turn be crushed by the ferocious power of the Greeks and the arrogant brutality of its king Antiochus Epiphanes. Echoing King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2, one pretense of power would fall to the next, in a vicious beast-eat-beast world where survival could only mean devouring all those around you. When and how would it end? If we have a hard time connecting with the apocalyptic visions of Daniel 7, perhaps it is because we have found ourselves more aligned with the predators than the prey. See, within a week or so, I'll close out on a house where I currently live, which is super exciting. If you've been to my house, you know how much I love it. Now, I say I will close, but what I really mean is my parents are helping me finance the house that my friends are graciously selling me for what is well below current market value. That is to say, I have friends and family whose generational wealth is helping me to secure a place to live and establish my own modicum of wealth. Never mind that my bank account and credit score are likely less than that of my neighbors who rent the house across the street. In the same past week, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who told me that he had just received notice in the mail that he and his family have to the end of the month before they must move out. They're being evicted because their apartment complex has been bought out by another company that plans to completely renovate the complex. Never mind that they have 3 kids and paid their rent on time, and it's been their home for many years now. The quote-unquote market forces that have been that I've been protected from are the same ones driving my friends out from their home. In an apocalyptic register, we might talk about a beast whose head is like a bull and whose claws are like a bear. The same one who promises to give us safety and security if we only bow down and worship it. Its worship creeps into denominational conferences where faithfulness to the gospel and care for the least of these is sacrificed on the altar of financial sustainability in order to survive as a powerful institution. And who doesn't want to survive? I mean, surely we would do everything in our power to protect ourselves and our communities. I mean, fear, after all, is among the most basic things that we can feel as humans. It keeps us alive. And yet, so many of the daily choices we make in fear to protect ourselves, our families, and our communities are also rooted in a refusal to accept the vulnerability inherent in being human, the vulnerability that love entails. At its worst, it's a refusal that turns us individually and collectively into monstrous creatures who trample the weak to ensure our survival. If the crater we left in the Middle East these last 20 years has taught us anything, it's that when we try to fight fear itself, we easily become terrorizers ourselves, turning into monstrous beasts who dehumanize the other in order to eliminate them as threats while becoming bestial ourselves. The real winners in the quote-unquote war on terror, after all, were not Americans and certainly not Afghans or Iraqis, but the same servants of the bull-headed bear of the market who convinced us we could buy our way to safety while devouring hundreds in the process. The nice people who no doubt make up the real estate company that bought out the smaller one, which owned the complex that my friend and his family live in, were simply doing their jobs to secure their livelihoods and their own families, following the nature of larger forces seemingly beyond their control, in a kind of beastly banality. The apocalypticism of Daniel pulls back the curtain. The beast that protects me devours them. Then, as Daniel watched, thrones were set in place, and an ancient one took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head was pure wool, and his throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence, and 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. And as I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being coming on the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. For despite whatever kings or kingdoms or beasts are permitted to rule among us for a season and a time, here in Daniel's vision it is revealed that ultimately it is the Lord who sits upon the throne. With light so radiant and blinding it is nearly impossible for even Daniel to see. It is the Lord, the Ancient of Days, who holds the books of life and knows and determines when the end will come. For reasons we're not given, our beastly rebellion continues to cover the four corners of the globe, and even now threatens to melt the ice caps and overwhelm us with the primordial sea. But the days of the beast are numbered. You see, what Daniel sees is not another beast to wage war against others. Not here. Instead, he sees one like a son of man, a human one. And yet, like a human one who comes with the clouds of heaven, he's like the Ancient One, the Lord himself. You see, the intervention within the sphere-soaked conquest for survival is the coming of the human one. To him is given glory and dominion and kingship, the one whose life does not come through fear-ridden domination, the one who does not need death to ensure survival, either literally or figuratively, but one who walks through the grave as pure, radiant life, the one whose perfect humanity invites us to become creatures who share in his divinity. Creatures part of an everlasting kingdom that can never be destroyed. And yet, even as Daniel the seer insists, to have such a vision does not free us from fear. Daniel is still troubled by the terrifying images. The beasts still stalk about, destroying communities, displacing families, devouring the vulnerable. Indeed, the Son of Man himself felt the terror of a looming crucifixion as he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. See, fear is still so basic to being human, not least for the human one, the Son of Man. But it need not transform us into beasts any longer. Survival is no longer the most important thing. It is not the end. Through Daniel's apocalyptic dream, we discover, yes, fear matters. We can't simply fight it or seek to eliminate it through 100 strategies of self-protection that cut us off from our neighbors. We must pay attention to it, probe it, explore it, notice its power, the insight it brings, all in order to refuse the way it easily turns us, our communities, our countries, and even our churches into beasts who devour one another. In the revelation of the throne room, the one who shares the very divinity of the Most High, the Ancient of Days, the Lord, the one who reigns despite all appearances to the contrary, comes and will come among the beasts of the earth as the vulnerable Son of Man, the one who reveals that the vulnerability and persistence of love in the face of our extinction is precisely what makes us most fully human, most like the human one, most like the divine one. May we bear witness to such a King and his kingdom. Amen.